Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me for the first monthly recap of the NFL on this channel. I hope to do this every month throughout the season, and let's just jump right into it. We don't need any formalities. We're going to start on the top of the standings here with the Buffalo Bills. So let's pull up their schedule. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. Now, the Buffalo Bills are currently 3-1. They're first in the AFC East. They have a one-game lead over the New York Jets, and they recently were absolutely demolished by the Baltimore Ravens. And I've seen a couple of Bills fans, not many, that have been a little bit despair, I suppose. They've been a little on the upset side for this game, and I can understand that, right? So there were some instances in that game against Baltimore where I think the play calling was a severe issue. The Buffalo Bills honestly felt like they could not get a drive going at times, and I think that is part of the reason why they lost this game. And another reason is, of course, they are missing quite a few key defensive players. Their second corner, Teron Johnson, I believe is his name, he's out. Matt Milano is out for the year. There's a couple of other injuries, but I don't want that to be an excuse for the horrible play calling. Now, being 3-1 in the first month of the season, I always have held the belief that the first month of the season is what will determine your margin of error for the rest of the season. So, for example, if we look at this next month of games here, from week 5 to 8 in October, if the team were to lose any of these games, or even all of them in a worst case scenario, you still have those wins from the first month of the season that you can sort of back your heels on and go, okay, we need to reset, we can correct this ship, we can go out and we can start winning games, and we can still make a playoff push. So being 3-1, they do have some leeway if they were to lose a game that they should win, or, vice versa. But looking at weeks 5 through 8, I think the Bills go 3-1 in this stretch. You have at Houston, at New York. You come back home and play the Titans, and then you're out on the West Coast against Seattle. So I think some of that travel time might factor into some of these games, especially because you also have a Monday night game against the Jets. So that's a a mini bye, I think, going into Tennessee, something like that. I can't do the math right now for some reason, but I think they go 3-1 in this stretch. I'm not overly worried about the Buffalo Bills right now. I think there are definitely some concerns. I don't think they're a perfect team, but I do think they remain a top 3 seed in the AFC. So that's the Buffalo Bills. Let's move to the New York Jets now. And I believe the New York Jets are in trouble. I really do think the New York Jets are in trouble. They have not looked good. Okay, they have not looked good at all. The offense at times has been completely and utterly dysfunctional. They have struggled in games where I am watching some of the worst quarterback performances I think I've ever seen. They played the Denver Broncos this week, and they lost to a quarterback who, at halftime, was 7 of 15 for -7 passing yards. The Denver Broncos did not play well, and you lost to them. I think it could get really ugly in New York really quickly if they start losing, and I think they will. Let's examine this. Okay, a little more closely. Week 5, you're going to London to play the Minnesota Vikings, who might be the hottest team in the NFL right now, and we'll talk about them later, but you're going to play the Vikings in London. I think you lose that game, and I think you lose it quite badly. The only game where the Jets have looked good was against New England, and I don't think New England's a very good team. But the Jets have looked horrible. They looked bad against Tennessee, and they barely squeaked out that win. They lost against Denver. They go against Minnesota. That's an away game. They go, I know it says versus there, but Minnesota is the home team in London, so that's an error by ESPN, but Minnesota is being treated as the home team. You have Buffalo coming to town. Buffalo just lost pretty badly. They've got adjustments to make. They're going to come in. Who knows, how they're going to do. They have the Texans the week before. And I think you lose that game too. And then you have Pittsburgh, who is another incredible defense. Offensively, I don't think they're anything special, but I mean, we watched what happened against Denver. We watched what happened against San Francisco. You've got the Vikings and the Steelers that are coming in, and I think they go 1-3. I honestly, I've never been a huge fan of Robert Saleh as a coach. I think he's a great defensive mind. I think he would be an excellent coordinator, and I think that's probably what his future holds in the NFL, is going back to a coordinator job. But I think, you could be looking at 3 or 4 straight losses here with the Jets, and I think that gets ugly quick. Aaron Rodgers has looked exhausted out there. The play calling has been atrocious. Offense is not being done. They're not getting anything going. I wouldn't be shocked, and this might sound crazy, I wouldn't be shocked if Garrett Wilson gets to, closing in on the end of this contract with the New York Jets, and he says, trade me, get me out. He's dealt with so much instability. The offense has never worked. The game plans have never worked. Quarterback play has not been there. I wouldn't be shocked if we get to the deadline or the end of the year and Garrett Wilson wants to leave. I don't think they're using him well. I think it's kind of a joke. I think there's quite a bit of wasted talent on the Jets, including Breece Hall. I don't think they're using him properly at all. Last year, I think they were kind of force-feeding the offense, and now it feels like they're just sort of taking away all of his touches. But I could honestly talk about the Jets for an hour, but my main takeaway is that I would watch out, and not in a good way. I think this team is in trouble. I'm not the only one saying this either. I've already seen a couple of the usual media people have also come out, and they've said that the Jets probably aren't it this year. So that's the New York Jets. Let's move now to the New England Patriots. This is another team that I don't think is very good. I think they're quite bad, actually. They've had some terrible losses. They did, of course, beat Cincinnati week 1, which was kind of shocking to a lot of people. And, of course, I have some thoughts about Cincinnati as well, but I'll reserve those for now. They lost to Seattle in overtime, which I think is their most impressive game of the year so far. I think they were actually playing rather well in that game. I don't think it should have been a close game, but it was. And that, of course, leads me to believe that Seattle might not be as good as we think, but again, I'll save that for Seattle. We've talked about it. The Jets, of course. You lose to the Jets, you lose to San Francisco. The next month, you are you have Miami coming in, you have Houston coming in, and you have Jacksonville coming in. So it's not the worst. And you also have New York coming in. So you have 4 home games in a row. I wonder, and stick with me on this, I've also just noticed that tickets for the New England Patriots in Tennessee are $29. So if you want to go to an NFL game, there you go. But this is honestly not the worst schedule you could have in October. I could honestly see the Patriots going 2-2 here. I could see them splitting. Miami, of course, is without Tua, and we'll get to Miami very shortly. But I don't know when Tua is coming back. Houston has looked a little bit dodgy, but I don't see the Patriots winning that in any scenario. Jacksonville, I think, is the worst team in the league, so I think the Patriots will win that, and I think they probably lose to the Jets. But I think that's a schedule where you could go 2-2 as you are, but I think you also could bring in Drake May as early as week 5. I know there are a lot of people, there are quite a few people in Patriots fandom that probably hate me for saying that, for even suggesting the idea that we should put Drake May in behind what is quite possibly the worst offensive line in the history of the NFL. It's really bad. And I understand that. I get it. I do. I understand the thought process that Robert Kraft doesn't want to risk his $50 million asset. However, I think people are too attached to the idea of sitting a quarterback and having it work. I think they are overwhelmed by recency bias with Jordan Love and Patrick Mahomes succeeding where they didn't play their first year. Jordan Love didn't play his first 3 years. Here's the problem. Drake May is not currently sitting behind a future first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback, nor is he, in fact, sitting behind a first ballot Hall of Fame coach. He is on a team that is bad. This was understood from the moment they drafted him. This team is bad. How do you handle it? Jacoby Brissett's not going to survive out there. He doesn't have the mobility. Drake May does have that upside. He's not really a running quarterback, but he does have the ability to extend plays behind the pocket, even outside of the pocket, and get a little extra time and maybe get this offense going. Jacoby Brissett's not playing well, and the goal in the NFL should always be to win games. Tanking has never worked. Tanking has never been successful a single time. I think the New England Patriots should seriously consider starting Drake May against Miami in week 5. Yes, you play the Texans immediately after. I don't care. The only way, the best way to develop quarterbacks is to give them the ability to play the game. Okay? And there are plenty of organizations that don't understand this. There are plenty of organizations that don't understand you have to not only play your rookie quarterback, but you have to constantly teach them every single week. On a week-to-week basis, you need to help them improve. Otherwise, they're just going to be a scapegoat. And you never want that. And it's like, obviously the fans can be guilty of that, right? The fans can be part of the problem and jump to blaming the rookie, and I think that's absolutely absurd. But to be a successful coach in the NFL, I fully believe that you have to work with your quarterback on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour, snap-by-snap basis so that they do not develop bad habits. You have to constantly coach that out of them. You have to have film of them in the NFL that you can look to and be, hey, here's the mistake you're making, here's how I want you to correct it. You can't do that if your quarterback is warming a seat on the bench. This is an absolutely ridiculous notion that we need to move away from immediately. Just because it worked with Jordan Love, and part of me is still thinking maybe it hasn't, because Jordan Love makes some really stupid decisions sometimes, but Jordan Love is a very physically talented player. He knows how to extend plays and all that. Jordan Love has a lot of upside, and I'm sure he gained valuable insight into how the Packers' offense works. And, that's fine. But you need to give your quarterback reps. Jordan Love looked terrible for the first half of, the year he came in and started. He looked awful. It took him half a year to get up to speed. And now he's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. Play your rookie. Play your quarterback. You only get better with reps. That's my take on the Patriots. With the Miami Dolphins now. We are well into this. This is going to be a long video. I hope you're ready. And, yeah. Anyways, Miami Dolphins only have 3 games in October. And looking at it, depending on the state of Tua, I have no idea if Tua is coming back or not. I am going to operate under the assumption that Tua Tagovailoa is not going to play in October. And that leads me to say that I think Miami will go 0-3 in October. You have 2 away games, 1 in New England. We talked about New England. 1 in Indianapolis, and you come back home to play the Cardinals. Here's my big insight. Here's my big thought here. I think every single quarterback, every single one that you play in those 3 games is better than what the Miami Dolphins have. And I don't think it's close either. I think that's just the be-all, end-all of the story. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't win. So, the Miami Dolphins currently don't have a quarterback, and I feel for Tua. It's unfortunate that he had that injury, and he's likely going to miss extended time. And you never pray for injuries in this league. You never wish for it, and it sucks when you see a player like Tua, who has been at times very, very good in Miami, and has taken them to playoff berths, and somebody who the fans really love. It sucks to see that happen, but the NFL can only be played in the present, and presently Miami's desperate. Their defense is their defense is not looking good. They gave up 31 points to the Tennessee Titans. So the defense is looking terrible. The defense was already kind of bad. There wasn't a lot that I was impressed by with the Dolphins defense. Now Tua's gone. Like, the primary offensive engine is gone. So I think New England will beat you, and I think they'll start Drake May. I want them to start Drake May against Miami. There's another game later in November that I think they could do it. But we'll talk about that next month and, see how things go. I think Joe Flacco will still be the starter in Indianapolis. I don't know how long Richardson will be out, but we'll get to that. And I think Arizona would have beaten you with Tua anyway. I think Arizona's a better team just as is. So I think Miami is going 0-3 in October. Let's move now to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I genuinely can't remember anything I said about the Steelers in my previous videos. So, sorry about that. I feel like I was probably wrong about them, though. I think I had them at like 7-10, 8-9, which, don't get me wrong, I think is still possible. But their defense is absolutely nuts. Before the game against the Colts, they were allowing like 9 points a game or something. And that's absolutely nuts. And that shouldn't go underappreciated. But how sustainable is it when your offense is as bad as it is? Because the Steelers' offense truly is terrible. I've never been a believer in Fields. I'm still not a believer in Fields. I think the problem with Justin Fields is he does really, really well in fantasy. And people, that play fantasy will look at that and think that means he's good. I'm not sold on Justin Fields at all. I think he still makes a lot of really bad mistakes. I think his decision making still needs a lot of work. And I think him as a passer is still nothing to write home about. So, looking at the October schedule for Pittsburgh, it's Dallas, Vegas, New York, New York. So you have only one away game. You have 3 home games, which is good. You have Dallas coming in next week, and I honestly believe the Steelers will win that game. I think the Steelers' defense will completely overwhelm Dallas, and I don't think they'll be ready at all. So I think they will win that game despite it being on Sunday night. I think the Raiders will prove more of a challenge. I think the Raiders are a slightly more well-rounded team than Dallas, despite having a worse quarterback. I think they've got the better defense. I think they've got a better run game, and that's usually enough to win games. But I think they will lose to Vegas. I think they will beat the New York Jets. I think they will beat the New York Giants. So I think they do go 3-1 in October. But I don't think it's a very convincing 3-1. I think it's going to be a lot of close games, maybe 3, 6, 7, maybe 10-point victories. But we'll see. There's still so much that, I want to see out of Pittsburgh before I go, okay, yeah, they're for real. They're a real contender. They can hold their own. But again, as I was talking about with Buffalo, they're 3-1, right? They can lose some of these games. It doesn't matter, right? See you go 2-2, say you go 1-3 in October. Your bye week's coming up, right? You can go into the bye, recollect yourself. You can make some adjustments. So I think October is probably most important for a team like Pittsburgh, where it's like I'm still not overly sure what this team is, but I think they go 3-1. I think they're going to be 6-2 going into the bye, and I think a lot of people are going to start talking about them as contenders, and I don't know that I see them that way. So let's move forward. Baltimore. As I said previously, I still think Baltimore is the best team in the league. Obviously, they started slow. I feel like they have a tendency to do that. Let me just check. Not really. They went 1-1 in the first 2 weeks last year, but they lost to the Chiefs week 2 too. Anyways, Baltimore, I still believe is the best team in the league. I don't think it's close either. Of course, they did start slow, but as you can see, these are both one-score games, right? Like it's not like they're getting shut out. They made some coaching mistakes early. I think, honestly, the biggest weakness that Baltimore has is John Harbaugh as a coach and some of his play calling. And I don't know if that's a conversation that a lot of Baltimore fans are ready for yet. I haven't really looked. I know there are a few little whispers, about that. But if we look at the schedule for Baltimore, I think they could honestly go 4-0 in October. I think, genuinely, they could go 4-0 in this stretch. I think their biggest competition is probably maybe Tampa. I think Cincinnati, despite it being a divisional game, and despite it being an away game, they've got 3 away games in October, which is a lot. They also have a Monday night game in October. So it is not an easy schedule by any means, but I'm not sold on Cincinnati as a team right now. I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scene that may be a distraction to the team, with Jamar Chase's contract and T. Higgins on the not the transition tag, the franchise tag. I think there's a lot going on there that's just sort of bubbling underneath the surface that could really blow up in their faces if things start to go wrong, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Washington is playing extremely well, which I never saw coming. If you go back far enough and watch my mock draft videos, you'll see that I had Jaden Daniels as my 4th QB prospect coming out of that draft, and I still stand by that. I still think he is the 4th best quarterback out of that class. And I say that because I think last year's quarterback class might genuinely be the best quarterback class that you or I are going to see for a while. For the next 5, 6, 7 years, maybe. I think it's going to be an incredible draft class. And I don't think I was unfounded in saying what I said about Jaden Daniels, where, I worried about some of his tendencies coming out of LSU. He had a tendency to take unnecessary sacks. He had some trouble throwing over the middle of the field, and a lot of that seems to be corrected now that he's in the NFL. I thought his ascension in the NFL was going to be much slower than it is. I never doubted his physical talent. I just thought some of his red flags would halt his progress as a player, especially with Cliff Kingsbury being part of the coaching staff in Washington, and I am shocked, But this is about the Baltimore Ravens, so I'll leave that for later. But I think Washington is probably the best team in the NFC East, and it's either going to be Washington or Tampa that really gives them, some fits. But I'm going to say it's Tampa now. In 2 weeks, I might regret saying that. But I think the hardest game here is Tampa, and I think Baltimore is better. So I think they do go 4-0 against these teams. I think they absolutely crush Cleveland. I'm not sold on Cleveland as a team as much as I was. I know in previous videos I had them doing very well, and I think they have the talent to do very well, except in one specific spot, and that is quarterback. I think they have the worst quarterback in the NFL, and I'm not afraid to say it. I think truly, Deshaun Watson is just as bad as a quarterback as he is as a person. So, karma has its way of dealing with things, and I guess that's just how it did it. So that's my prediction for Baltimore. I think they go 4-0. I think they're the best team in the league. Let's move now to the Cleveland Browns. How topical. I think it is almost shameful, the amount of talent that's being wasted on this team. Nick Chubb was recently elevated from IR. His practice window is open. They have 3 weeks to add him back to the open roster, and I think they will do that in week 6. That's just my prediction. I'm no expert. I don't have any sources, of course. But I think week 6 is when they bring Nick Chubb back. And I think they're still going to lose a lot. I think the one game they might win is Cincinnati. I think they absolutely lose to Washington. I think they lose to Philadelphia, despite not really believing in Philadelphia. They might win against Cincinnati, and they're not going to win against Baltimore. But this defense is very talented. It's a very good defense in Cleveland. I love Amari Cooper. I'm a huge Amari Cooper fan. I think he's definitely a guy to watch for come the trade deadline, and when the time comes next month, we'll talk about the trade deadline and That I am very much looking forward to. I love talking about the business side of the NFL. Um, honestly, more than the game itself. I love the management aspect and building a roster and drafting and scouting and all that. So when that time comes, we'll have a good time. But for the time being, I foresee, in my wisdom, 1-3 for the Cleveland Browns. I am not impressed with this team right now. The quarterback play has been absolutely abysmal. It's bad. It's not good at all. I think there is a significant possibility that they could bench Watson, and I think they would immediately be better. And like, genuinely, I think they would immediately be better starting either of their backups, Jameis Winston or Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think they would be a better team. But we'll see if that happens. There's always a chance it doesn't. So that's Cleveland. The Cincinnati Bengals, if we pull these guys up, the Cincinnati Bengals have had a very rough start to the year. Of course, they went 0-3 to start the year last year. They missed the playoffs, I believe. I honestly can't remember if they were in the playoffs or not. I don't think they did. I think they ended 8-9. Let me fact check myself real fast. What was their final record? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they went 9-8, and I don't think they made the playoffs. I think they might be worse this year. They lost DJ Reader to free agency. I know they lost a corner. I don't remember his name, and they lost the other safety because the preseason before, I think they lost Jesse Bates, and this year I think they lost their other safety, but I can't recall his name off the top of my head. Von Bell, I believe. Is that guy's name. But looking at this schedule, it's kind of bleak. We have Baltimore's coming in, and then you have 2 away games. They're both on the East Coast. One's a Sunday night game. I think you'll beat New York. I think you lose to everyone else. You might be able to pull out a win against Philly. Possibly, but for now I'm going to say 1-3. This is another instance where the play calling in Cincinnati has just been so bad. They desperately miss Joe Mixon for sure. They're not having the same kind of impact from the running game that they used to have. There's there's some hope, right? Like if they could be consistent, right? If they can consistently just keep winning drives, sustaining drives, I think there is potential for them to get back on track, but not this week. This is not this month. This is kind of a tough month for them, and I think it's a very important month. Sort of like the Steelers, but kind of in the opposite way, where it's like we think they might be bad, but maybe they're good. Where the Steelers is kind of like we think they might be good, but maybe they're bad. I think Cincinnati, it's like right on that cusp. They're kind of teeter-tottering between good and bad right now. I kind of lean towards them being bad. I could see the argument against that. And maybe I'll look like a fool when this is over, but right now I see I see a 1-3 record in October. So let's switch now to our next division, which is the worst division in football. How exciting. So Houston, I feel like is kind of not as good as we think they are. Yes, they're 3-1, but is it a convincing 3-1? I'm not sure. Offensively, they've played very well. Defensively, I have my doubts. Of course, the teams they've beaten when you look at this, Indianapolis, Chicago, Jacksonville, those are not good teams right now. I think Chicago and Indy could be good teams later. And of course, they have that bubble. They can lose some games. They can correct it. But they got utterly, utterly destroyed by Minnesota. Completely, utterly, totally destroyed by the Minnesota Vikings. It was ugly. And they didn't play very well against Jacksonville either. They didn't play against Chicago very well. And I didn't get to watch the Colts game, so I don't, I have no idea how they played in that game. But they didn't look their best. I think they are a good team. I believe in what they're doing. I think it could just be a slow start for them, and they're on the beneficial side of it, where maybe the Cincinnati Bengals are off to a slow start and they're not winning. But it's hard to say. So this is another team where I think October really, really matters. And they have 5 games in October. Look at that. They have 5 games in October. So let's review. They have Buffalo coming in. I think Buffalo wins that one. And, shocker. I said Buffalo would go 3-1 in their blurb. And I don't think I mentioned which team I thought they would lose to, but you all probably thought I meant the Texans. No, it wasn't the Texans. I think they lose to Buffalo. I think they beat New England. I think they lose to Green Bay. I think they beat Indianapolis, and I think they beat New York. So I think 3-2 is what they're going to get there. Whether or not it'll be a convincing 3-2, I suppose we'll have to see, but 3-2 seems about right for the month of October with the Houston Texans. Also, shout out Nico Collins for being the player I thought he was, and Diggs not actually impacting him whatsoever. Who knew? Who knew the young guy was still wide receiver 1? I did. Anyways, let's move on to the next team, which is not as fun. And that is the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts are 2-2. And I feel like that's just kind of a, kind of a luck of the draw thing, right? Like, I'm not overly convinced the Colts are good. They lost Anthony Richardson to an injury. I think it was a shoulder injury, if I'm right. I don't actually know. But they lost Anthony Richardson to an injury. Joe Flacco came in. They still won the game. I have some questions about the Indianapolis Colts. And I think a lot of those questions are whether or not Anthony Richardson is good. I believe he can be. I loved Anthony Richardson coming out of the draft. I was super high on him. He is an absolute physical freak. I don't think we're ever going to see a quarterback with his skill set ever again. He's just not been healthy, and that sucks. So I think some of their issues probably came from Richardson, and luckily they are 2-2. They have a little bit of leeway, little tiny bit. And their next 2 opponents are 2 of the worst teams in the league. Next 3 opponents are 2 of the worst teams in the league. So I think there is a run here in October where the Indianapolis Colts could go 3-1. And I'm not really surprised by that. I think they'll end up winning 5 games in a row and then get to Houston and probably lose. But, maybe there is a chance. I have no idea if Anthony Richardson will be back by then or not. But I don't know, the Colts, this is why the first month of the season is so hard, because it's like I just want to see more, right? I want to see more from them. I want to see them win convincingly. I want a lot of things out of the Colts, but I could see a 3-1 record here between Jacksonville, Tennessee, and Miami very easily. And then it gets really hard for the Colts after that, but we'll talk about that next month. So, Colts 3-1, comfortable second place in the AFC South, and a lot of people are probably going to start talking about them as a playoff team at that point. I don't know that I would subscribe to it, but the AFC is significantly weaker this year, so there's going to be a lot of weird teams making the playoffs. So let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans finally got their first win of the year against the Miami Dolphins, who do not have Tua Tagovailoa. And of course, we talked about the Dolphins earlier. But looking at it now, if we're looking at the Tennessee Titans, they play the Colts, who I think they lose to. They play Buffalo, who I think they lose to. They play Detroit, who I think they lose to. And that's it. They only have 3 games in New York. I was looking at Buffalo and said New York. Weird. They have 3 games in October. They have a very early bye week. I absolutely hate that the NFL does that, but that's for a different video. I think they go 0-3. Will Levis, I wanted to believe in. I wasn't sold on Will Levis being absolutely horrible. I still don't think he's absolutely horrible. I think he could be like a Jacoby Brissett, a younger Jacoby Brissett, back when Jacoby Brissett could actually be a starter and maybe win you a couple games a year while you build the roster around him. Or like a Gardner Minshew type. I think that might just be his ceiling. And that furthers my agenda that anyone comparing J.J. McCarthy or Drake May or Michael Penix to Will Levis is absolutely insane. But if you want to compare Will Levis to Bo Nix, feel free to do so. Anyways, the Tennessee Titans, I predict 0-3 in October. They need some serious help. I don't believe in Tony Pollard as a rusher. I don't believe in their receivers at all. I think their receivers are completely washed. Their defense needs so many pieces. L'Jarius Sneed is basically a non-factor, but I saw that coming from a mile away because L'Jarius Sneed is not all that talented. L'Jarius Sneed has a lot of limitations as a player that Steve Spagnuolo could work with. I don't think the defensive coordinator in Tennessee can work with them, so it's going to be a rough one if you're a Tennessee fan. It doesn't look very pretty going forward, so I hope you're ready to possibly draft maybe Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, something like that. I don't know. I'll start doing mock drafts in around December, when things are more settled. Maybe at the end of November I'll do a mock draft, or maybe I'll do one super early. We'll see. Anyways, let's return to Jacksonville. I think this is the worst team in the league. I don't think it's close either. In some of my previous prediction videos, I had the Jacksonville Jaguars doing very, very poorly. And foolishly, I went against my gut instincts. I went against all of my conventional knowledge about the NFL and about football and about my beliefs about talent evaluations and this, that, and the other thing. I went against all that. I went and I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these experts, maybe the people in my comments, maybe the people on Twitter, maybe they know more than I do. Maybe they're right. And I'm not doing this. I'm not putting on this show to be all chauvinistic and, arrogant to say that I know better than all of you. That's not at all what I'm trying to do here. I say everything that I say to just say I am never going against my gut again. Because I saw this coming. I like Trevor Lawrence as a player. I think he's very talented. I think he's being completely and utterly misused by the Jacksonville coaching staff, and I think that has been true since he has been drafted there. I don't think there has ever been a player who has been stunted more in their development by the team that drafted them than Trevor Lawrence ending up in Jacksonville. And that includes Sam Darnold ending up on the Jets, Josh Rosen ending up on the Cardinals when they were absolutely abysmal, even though Josh Rosen, I will admit, is nowhere near the player Trevor Lawrence or Sam Darnold are. But I think, truly, in my heart, that there has never been a prospect that has been more mistreated, more misused, more everything that can go wrong than Trevor Lawrence ending up in Jacksonville. I think this team lacks discipline. I think this team lacks coaching. And I don't know where it starts, right? I don't know if it's because of the GM, if it's because of Doug Peterson, if it's, I don't know where it starts, but where it needs to stop is with the owner. This is a team that has to hit the reset button. You have to start over from scratch. You have the quarterback, you're locked into that contract for 4 years. Fire the coach, fire the GM, trade whoever you need to trade to start something. But this is a team that needs to reset. It is absolutely inexcusable how bad this team is. It is absurd how awful this team is. They're the worst team in the league, bar none, bar nothing. Every single game you see here in October, you have them 4 home games. 4 home games. 2 of them are in London, but, they're still home games. You're losing all 4 of them. You're losing all 4 of these games. And that includes against New England. If New England doesn't start Drake May against Miami in Week 5, I think absolutely you start Drake May in Week 6 against Jacksonville, because Jacksonville sucks. Jacksonville's not good. There is absolutely nothing about this team that I see, I look at and I go, yeah, they can bring that back. I think Travis Etienne has regressed significantly. And again, I don't know if that's because of the player or if that's because of Doug Peterson as a coach. I think Christian Kirk has regressed significantly. And again, I have no idea if that's because of the coach or if it's because the player is getting older. I think you absolutely, without question, need to fire Doug Peterson. It should have happened last night. The Texans did not play their best game. You were in a position to win, and you blew it. That might have been your best chance to win a game this season. You might go 0-17. I look at this next month. I don't see a win. I look at November, and spoiler alert, when we get to that video, I don't see a win. I see so little with this team, with this roster, with this schedule. I don't know how you could be a fan of the Jacksonville Jaguars and put up with this year after year after year. It's been 7 years since they have done anything. Yes, they made a playoff berth in, Trevor Lawrence's 2nd year, I think, but they got bounced immediately. This is not a good football team, and I don't think it gets any better. I think it's going to be a very long season for, anyone in the Jacksonville area that might still be rooting for this team. But it's got to start. It's got to stop, I should say. I think Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke will be the 2 first firings of the year. And then we can start talking about Jacksonville as a football team again, because that's not what they are right now. They're a joke. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a joke. Anyway, Kansas City Chiefs up next. This is much more lighthearted than that previous team. But again, much like the Jets, I could probably talk about Jacksonville for hours on end about everything that's wrong. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. The Kansas City Chiefs, current Super Bowl favorites, which, I can't be mad about. I still think Baltimore's better, but whatever. They have 3 games in October. They have the Saints coming to town. They have a bye week. And then it's at San Francisco and at Las Vegas. I think they go 2-1. I think they beat the Saints, come off the bye, and lose to San Francisco. And I think they beat the Raiders. Now, the interesting thing about the Kansas City Chiefs is they are, much like the Texans, also not playing their best football. They're really not. There is a lot that I look at on this team and I say, maybe this isn't their year. Of course, I don't want to count out Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid because much like Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, you just can't do that. It would be absolutely asinine to count them out at any point. But they have very likely lost their number 1 wide receiver for the year. They lost Hollywood Brown earlier, and he's probably out for a year. Not that I'm super high on Hollywood Brown as a player. I don't think he actually would have added a whole lot to the Chiefs. There is sort of a little bit of mingling about that. I've heard that they might try to target Amari Cooper from Cleveland to try to get him as much needed depth at the wide receiver position. But the most interesting thing to me is that I think this might be Kelsey's final season. Much like Aaron Rodgers, who I think also will have a significant chance to retire, especially if the Jets start sliding like I think they will. I think this could be the final year that we watch Travis Kelce play football. And I say that because watching these games, he looks absolutely exhausted out there. And I never want to claim that I can speak for players and say I know what they're thinking and whatnot, but he just looks exhausted. He looks tired. I don't know that he's all in, like he has been in the past. And I can't say that I would blame him if he's not, all there, and maybe his body hurts, and he's not recovering as much as he used to or as quickly as he used to, and his brother retired last year. Maybe he's ready to hang it up, and I don't want to speak for him by any means, of course. I just want to say that I would not be surprised if it were to happen. And I know last year they kind of reserved Kelce a little bit, kind of lowered his snap count in the first half of the year, brought him back for the playoffs and the Super Bowl, and used him more then, and he was great. But this feels different. This feels like a different Kelce. And, if he does retire, what more does he possibly need out of the NFL, He won 3 Super Bowls. He's a future Hall of Famer. He has countless trophies, countless awards. What more is there for him to play for? It wouldn't surprise me at all if it's his final season. If they three-peat, if they go out and win another one, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he retired. I think it would almost be guaranteed that he retires the day of. So I think that is probably the storyline to watch the most with this team. That and the Amari Cooper thing. But to finalize my thoughts, I think they go 2-1 in the month of October, and we'll meet again next month to see if I was correct. Let's now move to the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are a team that I think is pretty underrated right now. I think they could have won against Kansas City if Justin Herbert didn't get hurt. They had some trouble running the ball, obviously, which is odd because that's what they're built for. But I think this Chargers will get better as the year goes on, especially because, looking at the 3 games they have here in October, Denver, Arizona, and New Orleans, I think are all winnable games. Denver especially, I think they will win. Arizona, maybe I'm too high on Arizona, but I like Arizona a lot this year. and we'll get to them. But I like Arizona. New Orleans, I think they can beat. So I think they go 2-1 in that stretch. But I think the Chargers are not nearly as doom and gloom as some people might think. I think I may have been a little bit down on them in some of my previous videos, but I like what the Chargers are doing. They got another tackle, and Joe Alt should probably be Offensive Rookie of the Year, even though, it'll probably be one of the many quarterbacks from this draft class that I think will find success in the NFL. But Joe Alt has played like an all-pro. He has guarded some of the best edge rushers in the league already. And he's done very well. So I think if you're giving Justin Herbert that kind of protection, this is a team that will be contenders. Maybe not this year, but going forward, absolutely. Maybe they need to go and get another wide receiver or a tight end or something. Maybe a corner, something like that. But I think this team is much closer to being a top 5 team in the AFC, top 3 team in the AFC maybe in a couple of years. But I like the Chargers. I think they go 2-1. I think it's going to be a good month for the Chargers. So that is that. Let's move now to the Raiders, I believe, are up next. Doesn't hugely matter, so we'll just jump right over. So the Las Vegas Raiders have been interesting so far this season. They got absolutely smacked by Carolina after Andy Dalton came in for Bryce Young, and I have a lot to say about Carolina. Of course, we'll get to that. This video is already almost an hour long. So I appreciate you for sticking with me if you're already here. Or if you're still here, I should say. But anyways, the Las Vegas Raiders. They got smacked by Carolina, lost to the Chargers. They beat Baltimore, and they beat Cleveland. So this is a team that is another one that's really kind of hard to figure out. Kind of like the Colts, kind of like the Bengals, kind of like the Steelers, where it feels like I need to see more this month. This feels like the kind of team where this is the month that kind of tells me what this team really is. And looking at the schedule, I think there are definitely some winnable games here. You have at Denver in Mile High, so that's never easy playing at altitude. You come back home, you play the Steelers, then it's in Los Angeles, and you come back home and play the Chiefs. I think there's a possibility for them to go 2-2 here. I think they do beat Denver quite handily, in fact. I don't think Denver's good at all. I think they can beat Pittsburgh, and then I think they probably lose to the Rams and the Chiefs. But it's also weird that those are all afternoon games. I just realized that's 4 afternoon games on CBS in a row. What were they cooking with the schedule there? Interesting. But yeah, the Raiders, I like some of their pieces, but I also feel like they're kind of in a transition right now where there are quite a few players on their roster that are getting older, and I don't know what the future really holds. I think they need a quarterback, and we'll talk extensively about quarterbacks when the year progresses and we have more data and more tape, and things start to settle into the draft process. We'll talk very extensively about quarterbacks. That much I promise you. When the time comes. And I think the Raiders will be in the market for a quarterback first and foremost, because I don't know if Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell are how you win games. They need a running back. I think they need to probably consider getting another receiver because Devontae Adams is well into his 30s. Jacoby Myers is 28. I like Trey Tucker a lot. I think Trey Tucker could develop into a very good receiver. He's only 23 years old. This is his second year. So how they get him more involved, I think, is very interesting. And I think Trey Tucker could be, the next man up. I don't know if he has the potential of being like a true wide receiver 1 for the Raiders. The possibility is there. I think he's probably going to take more snaps as a secondary option. And Brock Bowers, of course, is very, very good. So maybe they don't, need to go the traditional route and get a Z receiver or an X receiver, and they can just stick with a more traditional second option, and work Brock Bowers more as the primary target, kind of like the Chiefs did for a long time with Travis Kelce after Tyreek Hill left, where Travis Kelce just came the sort of pseudo wide receiver one. That is always an option for Vegas, but 2-2 in October, I think that's a decent place for the Raiders to be in. So let's finish off the AFC with the Denver Broncos. Now, the Denver Broncos are also 2-2, much like the Chargers and the Raiders, but I think this team is terrible. I think this team is really, really bad. Of course, they are 2-2. They lost to Seattle. They lost to Pittsburgh. They crushed Tampa Bay, which was very shocking. I don't think anyone had that on the cards, but they did. And, that's a good win. I don't want to take that from them, but I'm still not sold by them as a team. I think that was kind of a fluky game, where it's just like, you're not really ready for the team you're playing, and things go wrong and, whatnot. But, they won that game, so we can't really take it from them. They beat the New York Jets too. But looking at the upcoming schedule, they have the Raiders, the Chargers, the Saints, and the Carolina Panthers. I think they go 1-3. I almost said 3-1. I think they go 1-3. I think they beat Carolina. I think they lose to everybody else. New Orleans could maybe be one that you kind of squeak by. But I'm really just not sold on Bo Nix as a player. I think his decision making needs to improve dramatically. I was never impressed by his throwing ability. I don't know. It's a tough team to figure out. I don't think they're good. Regardless, I think it's more of a situation where I want to know how bad they are. Because if they're really bad, I think you just fire the coach and the GM and hope to start over. Do I think that's realistic this year? No, I think 2025 is probably the year where you really start to watch that. But again, looking at the October schedule, I still think they go 1-3. There's just a severe lack of talent offensively on this team. I've always been a big fan of Courtland Sutton, but I think injuries have really kind of derailed his career. Their running game is awful. It might be the worst in the league. Their tight ends might be the worst in the league. But hey, you got the defense. I guess there's that. But a good defense can't carry a terrible offense to the playoffs. So, I think the Denver Broncos are probably not very good. Now we move to the NFC. So let's check the standings. We have the Washington Commanders first. So let's talk Washington Commanders, as I almost did with the Baltimore Ravens a while ago. The Washington Commanders are, to me, the biggest surprise of the season. I know a lot of people have the Vikings as the biggest surprise of the season, because a lot of people saw the Vikings as being terrible, and I never did. Okay? I never saw the Vikings being terrible. Even though I did fully believe they'd be worse with Sam Darnold, but I never saw the Vikings as being truly terrible. So that's why the Commies are the biggest surprise to me. I am genuinely shocked that they're playing as well as they are, and they've gotten better every single week. They've punted one time in 3 weeks. They've punted once. That is absurd. That doesn't happen. Um, they are genuinely improving on a week to week basis, and it's crazy. Um, I'm still not sure how I feel about Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury as a coaching duo. It looks to me like Cliff Kingsbury may have toned himself back a bit after um, his time in Arizona, where I think he was just inexcusably awful and completely mismanaging his team. It looks to me like he has finally adapted to what works in the NFL, which is not what works in college, where in college you can mold your players into your scheme. In the NFL, you have to mold your scheme for your players, if that makes sense. So you have to make your scheme work for the skill set of your players. And I read an article recently where I don't know who the interviewer was, but somebody on one of the big media outlets had interviewed Cliff Kingsbury, and they talked about how he had interviewed with a couple other teams, the Raiders and the Eagles and the Bears and some other teams, and those had all fallen through, and he was ready to maybe go back to college and just kind of wait it out and maybe not be back in the NFL ever again. And then Dan Quinn gets the job in Washington and calls him up and just says, hey, do you want to make this work? And he said, sure. And then they met and talked quarterback prospects, and they circled Jaden Daniels' name, and Cliff Kingsbury started building a play sheet immediately during that meeting. So, good for him. Good for Cliff Kingsbury if he's learned and adapted and is ready to be a coordinator in the NFL. Good for him. I always like to see people succeed. So if that is the case, if he's finally not trying to force Kyler Murray to be a quarterback that he isn't, and is instead embracing what Jaden Daniels is, I think all the better for Jaden Daniels and for the Commanders and for Dan Quinn. I think they could really use a good season after all the turmoil and controversy and everything else that came from having Dan Snyder as your GM or as your owner for so long. I think it'd be good to have a good football team in Washington again. Will it be this year? Possibly. I think after these 3 weeks, I think they're easily the best team in the NFC East. Looking at their upcoming schedule, I think they go 3-1 again. I think they lose to Baltimore, but even then, maybe I could be convinced of that game going either way. I think that will be a very fun game because you get two quarterbacks that don't play the traditional quarterback role that we see in the NFL all the time, where it's all about pocket presence and making clean throws and all that stuff. Both of these players, Baltimore has Lamar Jackson, and obviously Jaden Daniels now in Washington. Both of these players can do absolutely ridiculous stuff with their legs. They're dual threat quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels, his arm has surprised me these last few weeks. His arm strength seems to be a lot higher than I thought it was. So that's very interesting, but I think the Commanders easily clear out Cleveland. I think they easily clear out Carolina. I think they easily clear out Chicago. I think there's 3 wins right there, and I think, honestly, even though none of those games are against divisional opponents, they don't play a divisional opponent again until November 3rd. I think getting those big wins there probably seals the division for them. Maybe, possibly. We'll see, of course. It's still very early to tell by week 9, but I think getting some of these wins now is huge for the Commanders. So we'll see, but I do think they are the best team in the NFC East. And let's talk about a team in the NFC East that I think is also overrated. I'm not huge on the Cowboys. I haven't been this entire season. They got manhandled by the Saints. They lost to Baltimore, and you're looking at that box score of 28-25, and you're thinking, oh, it must have been a close game. It really wasn't. The Cowboys never had the ball. They never possessed the ball within a score, so it was mostly just garbage time for the rest of that game, and it really wasn't close. They got pretty swamped by Baltimore for most of that game. So despite the score there, I don't think that game was ever close. And looking ahead, they also have an early bye in Week 7. So only 3 games in October. You're at Pittsburgh, Detroit's coming to town, and then you're at San Francisco. I think they maybe go 1-2. But even then, I think they probably can beat Detroit because Detroit's defense is not there. I don't trust it at all, especially the secondary. So, if you're getting Dak Prescott and you're feeding CeeDee Lamb as much as possible, and maybe you're working in the tight end Jake Ferguson, I think they could beat Detroit. I don't think they're beating either of those other teams, though, because of their defense. I think one of the biggest issues with Dallas right now is they're just so one-dimensional because they can't run the ball at all. And you can see it there. They're averaging, 36 yards a game or something like that, rushing. From their running backs, at least. I know Dak has a little in there, but just their lead rusher is averaging about 36 yards per game. That is awful. That is so bad. But yeah, they're just so one-dimensional offensively. You don't really have to worry about them running the ball. So if you can't attack from multiple angles, they also have an issue where their wide receiver 2 is Brandon Cooks at 34 years old, and they're very limited that way. Of course, Ferguson was hurt for a bit, and now he's back, so maybe that'll alleviate some of the symptoms of not having a great not having a great second option. But we'll see. I'm not overly convinced about it. And of course, they play 2 really tough defenses coming up, and they play one pretty weak defense. So we'll see. But I don't think they're winning many games this month. So that is the Dallas Cowboys. Another team that I think I'm rating lower than most people is the Philadelphia Eagles. So if we can pull these guys up, they do have a very easy schedule in October. They're also on bye this week, so an early bye. Maybe they can work something out with whatever is going on with them right now. It's mostly the play calling. It's mostly Nick Sirianni being terrible at his job. But the Eagles, to me, have just not looked very good. Of course, they won in Week 1 against Green Bay in Brazil. I don't know how much stock I really take into that in determining either of these teams. I don't think I take much stock in Week 1 to begin with. But they beat Green Bay, who I think Green Bay is really good. They beat New Orleans. I don't think New Orleans is very good. And they lost to the Falcons, and they lost to Tampa Bay. Granted, the Falcons, I think that was kind of a wonky win. I don't think that was a great win by Atlanta. I think maybe they didn't deserve it, but they got absolutely manhandled by the Buccaneers. And that was kind of embarrassing, That was not a great game for the Eagles at all. They looked completely out of whack. At times, they even looked dysfunctional. So that game, I think if you're an Eagles fan, you look at it and go, ooh, I hope we don't see a lot of that. And luckily, Cleveland, New York, Cincy, and Jacksonville is not a hard schedule. Or Jacksonville's in November, sorry. Cleveland, New York, Cincinnati, not a very hard schedule, even with 2 of those games being away games. I think they beat Cleveland. I think Cleveland could maybe win, as I said before, but it's basically semantics at that point. I think they do beat New York. I think New York is uniquely terrible. And I think there's a possibility to beat Cincy, but I think Cincinnati also could beat the Eagles. I think that's maybe a 50-50. It's hard to tell right now, but it's not the worst schedule. I think they probably go 2-1. Yeah, that's the Eagles. Let's move to New York, or New Jersey, as they should be called. The New York Giants are terrible. The New York Giants are not very good. They're not nearly as bad as Jacksonville. They have more talent than Jacksonville. But, right now they're not in a good spot. They got absolutely blasted week 1 by the Minnesota Vikings. They lost to the Commanders. They lost to the Cowboys. And they won against Cleveland. But they have not looked great. I don't trust Singletary as a lead runner. I never have. Malik Neighbors, however, is getting better and better every single week. I know that I was very high on Malik Neighbors coming out of the draft. I'm still very high on him. I think he's an excellent player. I think he's going to be very, very good. I also think he has the potential to become the best wide receiver in the history of the New York Giants. So that might be the hottest take in this video, but it is what it is. Looking at their October schedule, 4 games at Seattle, the Bengals and the Philadelphia Eagles come in, and at Pittsburgh. I think there is a possibility they go 0-4 in that time. I just think Daniel Jones really kind of limits what they can do. I don't think they're going to bench Daniel Jones at any point. I think they're just going to play the season out and move on from him in the off season, because the way his contract is structured, they have every ability to do that. So I don't think the New York Giants, as much as I harp on, I think the first and foremost priority of every NFL team should be to win games, because tanking never works. I believe that New York is taking that approach. I'm not overly convinced that the Giants are, really going to care about winning, which is weird to say. Obviously, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll's jobs might be in trouble, and they probably are. Maybe not so much Joe Shane, but Brian Daboll as a coach. He won Coach of the Year, and I don't think he should have, because I think he coached a much worse team than Kevin O'Connell did. And, everyone always says that, awards voting doesn't take into account playoff performance. But when the awards happen after, it's hard to say, but I don't think Brian Daboll should have won Coach of the Year. I think he had a very underwhelming performance. I think he's been a very underwhelming coach, even when he won that award. And, part of it is because Daniel Jones is not a very good quarterback, but part of it's just the play calling is not super impressive either. So I think they go 0-4 in October, and Brian Daboll probably loses his job in week 8, and they just roll with whatever's next. I don't know who they would elevate as their interim. I don't know who the offensive coordinator is, or the defensive coordinator. It's going to be one of their coordinators, but I don't know who. But I think we're looking at an interim head coach for the Giants going forward after October, and we'll check back with that, of course, next month. Let's go now to the NFC North with the Minnesota Vikings. I have said it from the very beginning. I have been singing the praises of the NFC North. I think this is easily the most competitive division in the NFL right now. I think Chicago's off to a slow start. I think they will catch up. It might be too late for them to make a playoff push. We'll get to that in a second, but this is the best division in football, bar none. This might have the top 3 teams in the NFC, depending on how healthy San Francisco is. And I'm kind of leaning to saying that the NFC North has the top 3 teams in the entire NFC, with the Minnesota Vikings, the Green Bay Packers, and the Detroit Lions. Detroit, I could be convinced to move. I think top 4, like without a shadow of a doubt, I think the 4 teams in the NFC that could make the Super Bowl are, without question, the Vikings, the Packers, the Lions, and the 49ers. I don't think anyone else is close right now. That might change by the end of the month. But the Vikings specifically, I knew their defense was going to be good. I mentioned it in my preseason prediction videos where it's like, I believe I mentioned that at the end of the year last year, the Minnesota Vikings defense played like a top 10 unit in the back half. So did the Bears. And I think the Vikings defense just got better over the offseason. Of course, they had the tragic passing of Kyrie Jackson, who I was very excited to watch play in the NFL. I thought he was going to be very, very good. And it sucks to not be able to watch him play and live his dream. And that is terrible. And you feel for the family and his friends, and it's an unimaginable tragedy for the NFL and for football that Kyrie Jackson doesn't get to play and experience this incredible start to the season for the Vikings. And a lot of that is to do with Brian Flores and his defense. And you wonder if, Brian Flores is going to get another shot at a head coaching job. I think he should. I think he's probably learned a lot since leaving Miami. And I think the reason he was fired was because, yes, he's a very, very talented coach, but he was trying to implement the Bill Belichick method, which doesn't work anymore. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't work anymore, because I think the Bill Belichick method could still work, but only with a quarterback like Tom Brady. So that's an entirely different topic that we could get to later. But the Minnesota Vikings defense has absolutely dumpstered everybody they played against. And of course, you look at that Green Bay score there in week 4. But the thing with that score is that at halftime they were up 21-0 or something, 28-0. They were up 28-0 going into halftime, and then they stopped playing the same defense. They were playing a completely different game defensively. And you'll see Packers fans that will say, oh, it wasn't garbage time if we had made our field goals. Well, if you had made the field goals, Minnesota would have kept playing their original game script, so you have no idea if that would have impacted the game as much. And it's like, yes, Jordan Love played incredibly well in the second half after they had switched to the more traditional too high bend but don't break defense, which I think only prevents winning, but that's besides the point. That game against Green Bay was not nearly as close as it might suggest. It's just the Vikings have a tendency, and I don't know if it's going to come back and bite them later, of getting way too conservative way too early. I think the Vikings fully are capable of going and absolutely just running up the scoreboard, but they don't. When you watch the Vikings, you watch basically 2 different teams. You watch the Minnesota Vikings play for the first half, and then you watch a traditional NFL team play the second half, because they run the score up so much that it just doesn't matter. And they did that against San Francisco too. You can look at that score there where it says 23-17. The game was never close. So I think as weird as this is to say, I feel as though we haven't seen the Minnesota Vikings at full strength. I feel like this team can still get even better. And I think that's absolutely crazy to think about, that this team is not playing their fullest. They're not playing a full game at the speed that they want to. And I'm still not a person that really buys into the narrative that Sam Darnold is suddenly this, absolutely crazy quarterback, this, gem that was just out there. I think with Sam Darnold, the thing that changed, because he doesn't look any different to me. Like, he doesn't look any different than he ever has, except for one key thing, and that is he has lessened his mistakes. He still makes some of the most brain dead mistakes I've ever seen in my life. He does a lot of stupid things, but he has limited it. And because the Vikings can get these huge leads, those mistakes aren't as backbreaking as they used to be. Of course, he threw an interception against Green Bay that probably shouldn't have been an interception, but he also had a fumble that was just super ugly. And he also had a near fumble where he tried to throw it at the line of scrimmage, and the throw was really bad. He was throwing it to Aaron Jones, I think. And that was nearly a fumble that led to a score by Green Bay again. So Darnold still makes some really boneheaded decisions, but he's playing well. I don't want to discredit him. He's playing extremely well, but I don't think he's necessarily playing better than he did. Right? I think the team around him is just better. Right? So, am I saying that Darnold was always good? Maybe I am. I mean, he wasn't the worst quarterback in the league just at certain points, but other points he certainly looked that way. It's just weird. I think I need to see more about Darnold. I still feel like the second shoe, right, is waiting to fall with the Vikings, but let's talk about their October schedule. They have 2 home games, one of them being in London against New York this week, and one of them being against Detroit, and then an away game against the Rams. Now, am I crazy to say that they go 3-0 in that stretch? I don't think so. I really don't. I'm not sold on New York at all. I think they will absolutely ream them. I think with Los Angeles, it depends on the health of the team, and of course it is also a Thursday game, and you're coming off of a short week against a team that I think will be tough in Detroit, so I think they probably lose against the Rams, but I think both of those home games, even with one being in London, I think they win both of those, and then they have a possibility of losing against the Rams, but I think they definitely could go 3-0, and then you look at the rest of the schedule after that, and it looks very fun. I can't lie to you. Watching the Vikings in November, December, I think is going to be very fun. But I think they could go 3-0. I'm going to say 2-1. I'm going to say it's a loss to the Rams on a short week after a slugfest with Detroit coming to town. But I think they do beat Detroit. And on that note, let's talk about Detroit, second in the NFC North. The Detroit Lions, I think offensively, still just as good as they were last year. They have struggled a bit at times to get things, clicking. Jared Goff has had 2 games where he looked kind of, and those 2 games were against Arizona and Tampa Bay. But offensively, I think Detroit shines, right? I think that's truly where they shine, is with their offense. Defensively, though, I think I think it's rough. The secondary, I'd like Terrion Arnold. I like Ennis Rakestraw. I'm not super sold on or was it Akeem Robertson or Carlton Davis that they brought in this year in free agency. I think it was Carlton Davis. I'm not super sold on either of them, and I think that's kind of showed up, especially against Seattle last night. Last night, I say as if it wasn't 4 hours ago. I think there were times against Seattle where their secondary was just non-existent. Obviously, it didn't end up mattering because their offense scored 42 points, and it's hard to lose when you score 42 points. But Seattle definitely at times looked like they could do whatever they wanted. I was shocked that I was shocked that the Lions struggled to stop the run to the degree that they did. Seattle, I think, had like 140 rushing yards between Walker and Charbonnet, and Walker, of course, had 3 touchdowns. It wasn't enough, obviously, but there were definitely things I watched in that game where I go, it's a little interesting. And I think maybe Detroit's strategy is just to score on every drive and not worry about defense, but we'll see. Looking at their October schedule, they have another early bye in Week 5, which is this week. They play Dallas, Minnesota, and Tennessee. I think they beat both Dallas and Tennessee and lose to Minnesota just because it's in Minnesota. I think they will get the game later that's in Detroit. But we'll talk about that in December. But again, I'm not sold on Dallas. I believe I when we talked about Dallas, I believe I said that Dallas would win. Maybe. I can't remember. I think there is a possibility for it to go, both ways, and the same with the Minnesota game. But the more I look at it, I really think I made a mistake if I said I had Dallas winning that. So I don't know. It's tough to remember. I've been yapping away so much that I genuinely don't remember if I said I'd have Dallas winning that. Because looking at it now, from here, I think I have the Lions winning actually. Because I didn't realize they were coming off of a bye. So if I did say that Dallas was winning, I would like to amend that now. But I think they lose to Minnesota and then absolutely crush Tennessee. So yeah, that's a 2-1 for the Detroit Lions, remaining second in the NFC North, I believe, and then third in the NFC North is the Green Bay Packers. Now, I think the Green Bay Packers are actually incredibly good. Even though the Minnesota game was not close, despite what the box score says there, that game wasn't close at all. I think it's very hard to say that they played poorly in that second half, especially because they played a more traditional defense. They played the kind of defense that you'll see on a regular Sunday when you're not playing against the absolute madman that Brian Flores is. So when I look at the schedule and I see the Rams, the Cardinals, the Texans, and the Jaguars, I think they beat the Jaguars handily. I think they beat Arizona quite easily. The Rams, I think, entirely depends on how healthy the team is. Everything that I've read so far sounds like they're not going to be healthy, so I probably will have Green Bay winning that. And then Houston is the one where it's kind of up in the air. And I think I said I had Houston losing to Green Bay. I hope I did, because I think Houston loses to Green Bay. So I think there's a possibility here that Green Bay goes 4-0. Either 4-0 and 3-1. But like looking at it right now, if Los Angeles isn't healthy, give it to Green Bay. Arizona, I think without question, is a Green Bay victory, and Jacksonville, I think without question, is a Green Bay victory. So the only one that's really kind of up in the air a little bit is against Houston, but I think Green Bay easily is one of the top teams in the NFC. I think they're definitely a contender, especially as the year goes on. And they start getting back in rhythm. Jordan Love gets back up to speed. I think absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, they will be a team to watch in the playoffs to look as a potential Super Bowl winner. I think this is a crazy good team. Of course, they did lose Christian Watson to injury. I have not heard any updates about the severity of that injury. It didn't look very good during the game. But they have other receivers, of course, that can step up and make plays when needed. Defensively, I think they could probably use some more up front to stop the run. Is it the biggest deal in the world? Maybe not. But defensively, I think they just need a little bit more to be like, superstars. I'm excited to see how Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks develop. One of them, I think, will probably end up getting moved at some point, and I think it might probably be Watson if he can't stay healthy, just because, having too many mouths to feed sometimes isn't a great thing. But that's well down the line, like a next year kind of thing. But yeah, I think there is a significant possibility for Green Bay to go 4-0 in October. And then finally in the NFC North, let's look at the Chicago Bears. Now, I'm still high on Caleb Williams. I don't believe any of this nonsense about people saying he's a bust. I think he's a very talented quarterback, and when he adjusts to the speed of the NFL, I think he's absolutely going to be a top player in the league. I think he's going to be very good. The problem with Chicago, of course, is that their play calling is very bad. Like, very, very, very bad. I think Matt Eberflus should have been fired last year. Shane Waldron, I am starting to see why Seattle fans were happy to see him leave. Because the play calling in Chicago is their downfall. The defense is very good. Okay? Let's not be reactionary. The Chicago defense is very good. It's the offense that is currently the problem, and we need to see more from it. And I think we will eventually. I want them, to start using Roshan Johnson more. I don't think DeAndre Swift is the answer at the running back position, especially because they're trying to use him as a power back, which he has never been. So I think they just need to tighten up their play calling. Obviously, they have a decently early bye in Week 7. So, they've got 2 easy games. They've got Carolina and Jacksonville, and they're both home games. I think they win both of those. And then it's right into the bye week, and I think hopefully they use the bye week to correct some of the issues that they've had, and hopefully that's an extra week to get Caleb Williams up to speed with the NFL, and he's ready to be the player that they drafted him to be. And then Washington is a hard one. I think that will probably get flexed into primetime. I haven't been paying attention to see what else is happening that week, but Caleb Williams versus Jaden Daniels, I would not be surprised to see if that gets flexed to primetime. Not that I'm super savvy on how the flexing works, if it's even eligible in week 8. I don't know for sure, but if it is, if that is a game that is eligible to be flexed into primetime, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if it is. So, Chicago Bears, I'm going to say 2-1. I think they win both of their home games, lose against Washington coming off the bye. But 2 very easy games coming up for Chicago. Plenty of time to right the ship, and there's a possibility the NFC North could have 4 teams in the playoffs. But we'll talk about that later in the year. Moving now to the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield having a great year, very good year, though he did struggle against Denver's defense. I didn't watch the back half of that game. I kind of tuned out because it was just a slugfest for most of the game. So I don't have the most insight into what went on, but it was bad. It kind of gives me pause when I watch that and they lose to Denver, who I don't think is very good, but at the same time, I'm not overly worried about their schedule. They play Atlanta twice, they play New Orleans, and they play Baltimore. I think they lose to Baltimore, but I think they beat the other two quite easily. I think they're better than New Orleans. I think they're better than Atlanta. I think there's definitely room for them to improve. I think, especially the tight end position, the running back position, I think both of those are weak spots. But maybe they'll get with more reps, right? If you give them more reps, they might just improve on their own. Of course, I wasn't the biggest fan of Bucky Irving coming out of college, but he looks all right. He's doing okay. I think it may have just been a fluke against Denver. But yeah, there were just a lot of mistakes by the Bucs. Like, they really kind of beat themselves in that game. But we'll see. I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going 3-1 in October and retaining sole control of the NFC South for basically the entire year. I don't think New Orleans or Atlanta are that good. I think Atlanta's in second place. Yes, they are. So Atlanta, Kirk Cousins is not playing well. That's the end of the story. That's why they're 2-2. They did beat Philadelphia, even though I'm not sure they deserved to win that game. That was a weird game. They also beat New Orleans, and New Orleans is a team that I was never really sold on, despite some of their early performances in the year. They did manage to beat New Orleans. I think they'll do it again later on. But it's not looking good for New Orleans. But anyway, the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons play Tampa, Carolina, and Seattle. I think they beat Carolina, and that's about it. Again, Kirk Cousins just isn't looking very good. The play calling is weird. They're still not incorporating Bijan Robinson the way I think they should. They're not incorporating Kyle Pitts the way they should. I think there's a lot of talent kind of going to waste in Atlanta. I don't know why they drafted Penix. If they didn't sign Kirk Cousins, if they just drafted Michael Penix at 8, I don't think it would have been the worst idea in the world. I don't know that I would have liked it, but I would have liked it more than I do now. I believe I said in my original prediction video that, this is not the year where you watch Atlanta and think they're contenders. I think they need another year to really get things going. And I think they'll probably be better at the back half of the year because of that. If they get more time to get things into gear and figure it out. But we'll see. I'm not overly sold on Atlanta at all. I think defensively they need a couple pieces as well, especially a proper number one edge rusher. I like Arnold Ebiketie a lot. I'm a big fan of Arnold Ebiketie. I don't think he will ever be the number one that you want on the edge. I think he'd be a premier number 2, though. So, yeah, Atlanta, that's about all I got for Atlanta. I think their year for real, can this team compete, is next season. And the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints. I'm not sold on them at all. Of course, they absolutely demolished Carolina. They demolished Dallas. I still wasn't really sold on those. I like the Clint Kubiak hire. I think Clint Kubiak is a good hire. I think he probably needs a little more time. I'm not sold on Derek Carr as a quarterback. I think he does a lot of things that you just don't want your starter to do. Will they get to a point where they consider starting Spencer Rattler? I don't think so. I wouldn't completely put it out of the question, but I just don't think they would start Spencer Rattler at this point. Looking at their October schedule, I think they lose to Kansas City. I think they lose to Tampa. I think they lose to the Chargers. There's a chance they could lose to Denver. But I think there's more of a chance that they beat Denver, despite it being a short week, and they play a divisional opponent, and a divisional opponent that had a bit of a yawn there. A divisional opponent that I think will end up beating them. So I think Denver is kind of their iffy game, but I am going to predict them to go 1-3. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I also had 1-3 for Atlanta. So let's move now to the bottom of the NFC South, the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers, I think, got immediately better after benching Bryce Young, and I don't think that should be something that surprises people, because Bryce Young isn't good. And it's like, I don't want to be like super over negative about players, but I'm just tired of the narratives around certain players where you just have so many people that'll make excuse after excuse after excuse, and I get it, right? I do. You want these people that play on your team to succeed. You want them to be good. You hope for them to be good. But the reality of the situation is sometimes, and in fact more times than not, they will disappoint you. Because this isn't Madden. Development is non-linear. And Bryce Young, coming out of college, was much easier to project as a bust than someone like CJ Stroud or even Will Levis, because of the way that his play style is so much more difficult to project to the NFL, right? You have a guy who is not a traditional passer, is not prototypical height. He's 5'9". He's rather light. He doesn't read the field very well. He has trouble under pressure. He has trouble extending plays. And it's like, these are things that are just fundamental to who he is as a player. And yes, the people who make the excuses are correct. He's had an abysmal situation with no talent around him. And, the coaches aren't doing anything. Like, that's the problem. Could Bryce Young still be a starter in the NFL somewhere else? Maybe. Is his time as a starter in Carolina over? I would think so, yes. I think the offense is just better with Andy Dalton. The team is just better with Andy Dalton. I think you just move on at this point. You cut your losses and you move on. San Francisco did it with Trey Lance. They spent 3 first-round picks, and I think they also spent a second and a fifth to go up and get Trey Lance. It was the wrong move. Of course, they kind of lucked out where they got their replacement right away with Brock Purdy, and I don't think Carolina has a young replacement waiting in the wings to do that. Um, but I think you just cut your losses. You say, thank you for your time. Sorry it didn't work out. Where would you like to go? What team would you like us to send you to? Because it didn't work here. I think it's very safe to say that the experiment of Bryce Young in Carolina is over. It didn't work. It's okay. These things happen. It happens a lot in the NFL, actually. Players bust. And I think, Carolina needs to do what is best for the team and what will get them to win games more consistently, which they have not done for how many years now? And I think it's been since Cam Newton left. They just haven't won anything. They've been terrible for so long. Part of it is because David Tepper is a terrible owner. Um, I don't know who their GM is now. Scott Fitterer, I know, was the one who initiated the trade to go and get Bryce Young. He was the one who drafted Bryce Young. But nobody who drafted Bryce Young is still in the building. I wouldn't be shocked at all if it's just over now for Bryce Young. I don't think he's going to be traded at the deadline. I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that he would get traded at the deadline. But I don't think it will happen. But I do think it's over. And I think if you're looking at, the next month of games, you're at Chicago, you have Atlanta coming to town, Washington, Denver. If you're looking at those games and you say, well, we want the best chance to beat these teams because these are not easy teams to beat. This is not a good schedule. This is a very tough schedule, and it just keeps getting harder as you go through the year. I think you look at what gives you the best possible option to win, the best possible chance, and I think that's Andy Dalton. So against Chicago, I think you lose. Against Atlanta, I think you lose. Against Commanders, you lose. I don't have to think about that one. And then at Denver, that's the one where it's like, maybe, but probably not. So I think the Carolina Panthers go 0-4. They end up 1-7, even though I think it will be a better team at 1-7 than it would be with Bryce Young. I still just think this team lacks so much talent. Wide receivers, tight ends especially, offensive linemen, but we could have a whole discussion about the regression of the offensive line positions in the NFL. But not today. Of course, this is going to be more than a 2-hour video, and I apologize if you're waiting to get to your team and it's taken this long, but hopefully you enjoy the video, and I thank you if you made it this far. So let's go now to our final division, which is the NFC West. Seattle Seahawks first in the NFC West, 3-1. The Seahawks are not a team I'm sold on, and that has been the truth since forever if you watch my old videos. Of course, they just lost to Detroit. They got pretty hammered, and of course, they are missing a lot of defensive starters. If we go, they're missing starting safety Julian Love. They're missing Jerome Baker. They're missing Leonard Williams. Their star defensive end. I was never the biggest fan of him. They're missing Byron Murphy, who I do love. They're missing Boye Mafe, who I think is the best player on the team. Defensively, they're missing, offensive linemen. They're missing depth. They're missing, they have a lot of injuries. So that does play a factor, of course. So maybe they were not as competitive as they could be. Geno Smith did play very well, but I'm still just not sold on this Seattle team. I think they need another year to fully develop the game plan, to fully develop, what they're trying to do as a team. Because if you look at this, they played Denver and New England to a near standstill. Those are not good teams at all. You finally did beat a bad team convincingly against Miami, but it took overtime to beat the Patriots. It took overtime to beat the Patriots. You beat the Denver Broncos by 6 points. And it wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh, the box score is misleading. It's like, no, that was a close game. It was ugly at times. And, that's the kind of thing that gives me pause to be like, why are you struggling against some of the worst quarterback performances we've ever seen? I don't know. It's a tough team to figure out. I think the Seahawks are probably a team like the Bengals, like the Steelers, like some of the other teams we talked about, where it's like I feel like October is a very important month for these teams. This is, how we figure out if they're good or not. All of that being said, I think they go 1-3. In these next 4 games, I think they go 1-3. I think they beat New York. I think they lose to San Francisco. I think they lose to Atlanta, and I think they lose to Buffalo. I do not believe in the Seahawks as a team, and maybe it'll just be a thing where they're just not healthy. It could just be that. And I shouldn't hold that against them if it's just a matter of health, because, obviously the healthier you are, the more likely you are to make the playoffs in the first place, but that's just how I feel about Seattle right now. I want to see more of them. I want to see more convincing wins. I want to see, the Seahawks be a team that should be first in the NFC West, because I don't think they are right now. But we'll see in a month, and then second place in the NFC West, I think, is the Niners. Yes, 2-2. So the Niners, they lost 2 games. They won 2 games. They beat the Jets quite handily. They beat the Patriots quite handily. They kind of struggled. Against Los Angeles. They got destroyed by Minnesota. These are things that make you question the team. Just a little bit. Part of it is obviously because Christian McCaffrey might be out for the year. He's having some issues with his both of his Achilles tendons, Achilles tendonitis. So there could be a possibility that Christian McCaffrey misses the entire year, and that's a huge part of their team. I know they have some other injuries. I know Tufunga is out, their starting safety. So this could just be another team where it's like injuries are what's preventing them from being the team that they could be. But as it stands right now, I'm not fully convinced on them. I think they are. They should be. I don't want to say are. They should be a premier team in the NFC. They should be a premier team in the NFC. They should be a top 3 team in the NFC. I think they might be number 4 right now, behind the 3 guys in the NFC North that I talked about earlier. But as it stands, I think they beat Arizona. I think they beat Seattle. I think they lose to Kansas City, and I think they lose to Dallas. So I'm going to have them going 2-2. Kind of just middling about for a while. It's hard to say, but they do have a bye in week 9, so maybe they go 2-2 and then figure it out from there. But let's check out the next team, which I believe is the Rams. Yes, Rams are third in the NFC North, and the Rams are not healthy. I think the Rams could be way better. Of course, I had them in my Super Bowl in previous videos, but as it stands right now, Puka Nacua is out for at least another couple weeks. Cooper Kupp is out for another couple weeks. Let's just check because it's not great. Darius Williams is on IR. But his 21-day window to return to practice should be open this week, so good for him. Nothing new on Cooper Kupp. Puka Nacua out at least until week 8. You hate to see it. Jonah Jackson is out, and John Johnson is out. I think Jonah Jackson's out for the year. I can't remember, but yeah, there's a lot of injuries going on in LA. I think they could definitely be way better. But as it stands, they have a bye week in week 6. I think they lose to Green Bay because they're not healthy, even though I think they should be a good team. Things happen. Las Vegas, it's hard to say. I think that game could go either way as well. I'm going to give it to Vegas, and then I'm going to let them win against Minnesota because it's a short week for Minnesota, and they come off of a divisional game. My voice is really starting to go out, so we better get this done. All right, so I'm going to say the Los Angeles Rams go, what did I say? 1-2. 1-2 for the Los Angeles Rams, which hurts me to say because I was really looking forward to watching them this year. I think they could have been really good. So, finally, the Arizona Cardinals. That's the wrong page. Schedule. All right, so the Arizona Cardinals, I think, are kind of underperforming what I expected. I thought they were going to be way better. I think they still have the possibility to be very good. Defensively, I think they're absolutely doomed. Their defense is terrible. I know they're also dealing with some important injuries. I think it's mainly defense. Trey McBride was ruled out. Was that for the game today? I think it was, yeah. But yeah, so they're dealing with some injuries. I know they're missing a guy on, Darius Robinson. They're missing their rookie on defense. So their defense is terrible, and it probably still would have been terrible if it was fully healthy because they're just missing pieces anyway. So I think defensively they're kind of, not all there. And then offensively they've kind of been a little scattered. They haven't performed to what I thought they could be. And I have to be honest with you, I haven't watched any Cardinals games this year. But yeah, it's from what I can tell, from everything I'm reading and catching the highlights, of course, because I can't watch every game, but catching the highlights, of course, it just seems like they're limited on both sides of the ball, and that kind of sucks because you can't win games that way. And looking at their schedule, it's not easy at all. I'm gonna have them going 3-1, losing to San Francisco, losing to Green Bay, losing to Los Angeles, and then winning against Miami. So that is my review of this month of football. I know this was kind of impromptu and scatterbrained, but that's kind of how my content goes. Of course, if you're a regular viewer, you know that already. And I'm sorry if my thoughts aren't always as cohesive as I sometimes hope they are. I've had my share of issues trying to be a consistent creator, so bear with me as always. I thank you very much for watching. If you did make it this far, consider liking the video, and I hope to speak with you all again soon. Goodbye for now.